Ray, hi. We are so happy to be here today with Mat Duerden, and we are just going to jump right in. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and just kind of give us a brief bio of how you got started doing the work you're doing?
Sure. It's sort of a long, random story, but I'll give you the
Go ahead.
short version. So I'm an associate professor in the Department of Experience Design and Management at BYU in the Marriott School of Business. I've been here for 9 years. And, my sort of through line in terms of my professional and also, I think, personal experience is I'm just really interested in experiences in general, especially experiences that impact people, and I'm interested in unpacking experiences and trying to understand, okay, so this happened in this one context with this one experience. How can we take that principle and apply it over into a different context? And so from a research perspective, I look at a variety of things from employee experience to educational experiences to study abroad to youth, family. I mean, I jump around in a lot of different contexts and try to see sort of principles that can generalize across those. And for me, it all started in my family's whitewater rafting business, where I started working as a guide when I was about 14 and saw people change and relationships develop in really interesting ways over like a 5 to 7 day wilderness trip. And that then led on this sort of meandering path through academia to where I am now. And I teach classes in experience design to undergrads and MBA students. And yeah, I've got a family. My wife and I have 4 kids, and we like playing outside a lot. And yeah, it's a little bit about me.
I like it. It looks like you have a helmet in your background.
Oh, I'm a bike commuter. Yep. There's where is it? This way? There we go.
I was going to question whether or not you love the outdoors, but now that I see that.
Yeah. We spend a lot of time on bikes. So we love bikes and being outside. So
awesome. So can you help us, just for somebody who has no idea of kind of a little bit about your book and what experience design is? Can you just give us like a like 10,000 foot, like what is
sure.
experience, and just kind of help us understand and define what it really is?
Yeah. So I think first, just thinking about experiences, right? Experiences, like what's an experience? It's this abstract sort of phenomenon when you really think about it, even though we all have lots of experiences every day, right? So I think the first thing to understand is that there's 2 parts to experiences that we have to think about. So the first part is the observable or objective part, right? We are having a online chat, right? Chat experience. We're both having that same experience right now. Or, any experience you have, right? You can see sort of what's happening around you, right? Whether that's on an app or you're in person or whatever it might be. So you have that objective or observable part. And then more importantly, you have the individual subjective part of an experience, right? Right. Yeah, exactly. What are the memories you take away from this experience? How are you sort of interpreting it in the moment? You and I will both walk away from this chat with different memories, right? Because we played different roles, we're different people, we have, whatever it might be. And that's true for any experience. And so as an experience designer, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a space. And by space, that could be an in-person space. It could be a virtual space. I like to use the term Experiencescape to think about, like a landscape. You have different elements that you're trying to arrange, right? So with Experiencescape, you're thinking about the elements that you're arranging or orchestrating. These include
stuff you're like really in control of, your people, your places, those
kinds of stuff. You've got people, place, rules, objects. So we've got like 6 sort of elements that we talk about. So you're going to arrange those and then recognize that you've designed sort of that objective, observable part of the experience. And then people are going to come in, and they have to pay attention to it, right? If they don't pay attention to it, the experience hasn't happened. If I have a student sleeping in the back row of class, like they're having a different experience than I've designed in terms of the learning experience, right? Or if you have, whatever, kids like running all over the place during a family activity, like they're having their own sort of experience. But if people pay attention, they in essence co-create the actual experience in that space, and then they come away with memories. And so experience design is about how do we intentionally create experience-scapes that are going to produce memories, or better even yet, stories that me as the provider and the participants in the experience are going to be happy to tell, right? And so the reason why, like, I am such a proponent of experience design beyond that's like my job, is that any organization, whether that's a business or a family, provides experiences, right? And a business provides experiences to its employees and to its customers, regardless of whether they're in an experience business like a hotel, or if they, make widgets, right? Because ultimately, when you interact with a business or you interact within a family, you walk away from that interaction and you tell stories about what that interaction was. And so, yeah, exactly. So as the provider, if I'm in a provider role, like, do I want to help people tell a story that I want them to tell, or am I just going to leave it up to chance and sort of see what happens, right? And so, anyways, so that's sort of a quick overview of experience design conceptually, I guess.
So tell me, because I mean, I did do a little bit of research, so I know a little bit about what you're talking about. So it was really cool to hear you kind of explain all of that. But what's the most surprising outcome, like, and the findings in your research? I always think that that's fascinating. Like, what was the most surprising thing to come in? Because you always kind of have a little bit of a preconceived, you're like, I have an inkling of what I'm thinking we're going to do, but what were some of the surprising things that maybe came out of some of your findings?
Oh man, I'm distracted by all shiny objects. And so I do a lot of different like research projects and try to sort of weave things together. But I think some core principles to think about, so first of all, I like to think about experiences in three sort of ways, or three phases, I guess. So you have the anticipation phase, right? Before an experience actually, right? Then you have the actual experience, like the participation piece, and then the reflection piece, right? So I'm planning to go on vacation. Like, some research actually shows the best day of your vacation is the day before you go, right? Because everything's great. You're just super excited about it. Nothing's gone wrong yet, right? And then you go on vacation, and then you come home and you have your memories about that, right? So there's a bunch of things to consider across those three phases and what you do. And oftentimes we just think about the participation phase, like what we're actually going to do. But my research and a lot of other people have looked at sort of those different phases. So, for example, one of the things that we know for some research that I've done is it's important to, in the anticipation phase, give people the content and knowledge they need to then prepare to be able to fully participate in the actual experience, right? And that seems simple, but we so often don't do that, right? That experience design, in a lot of ways, it's about attention, and we are distracted by so many different things, and attention is a limited resource, right? So what you want to do is you want to prepare people with whatever content and competencies they need up front. So when the participation phase happens, they're not asking like, what am I supposed to do? How do I do this? What's going on, right? They're just doing the thing, right? They're having that experience that you want them to have.
They're ready to go. They're like,
they're ready to go.
Because you've prepared it that way.
That seems like super simple, but we've seen that play out in research, that especially, if you're, a lot of times we'll look at people's knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors as outcomes, right? Did they gain knowledge? Did attitudes change? Did behavior change? And you've got to sequence that, right? Like, if you just give people an experience but they don't have the knowledge, it's not going to move attitudes or behavior. But if you've given them sort of content and competencies up front, when the experience happens, like, they're much more likely to be changed in terms of attitudes and behavior, which then leads to like the reflection piece, which I think is actually the most important part, because we come away from experiences with memories. That's like the product of an experience. So the question is, well, what do we do with those memories, right? And oftentimes when you have an experience, especially if it's an experience in a new context, or it's a new experience, or we sort of leave home and do something and then come back home, as we transition from the experience back into whatever our regular context is, in some ways it's like thinking about going through customs, right? and you have to declare like, here's all my memories from the
Here's
trip.
the things that I got. Here are all the things I
Here's the
collected.
things that I
All
got.
the knowledge I got. Sure.
Right. But you probably had experiences like this where you do something and then the transition back into the regular world is just very abrupt, right? And like, okay, that was great. And now I'm running 100 miles an hour again. When that happens, those memories like it's like they get stuck in customs. Like we can't take them with us. And so we've shown research that, the degree to which people reflect on their experience, regardless of the type of reflection, right? Whether it's journaling or talking to people or scrapbooking, we were talking about scrapbooking earlier, or posting it online or whatever it is, if they have opportunities to talk about it, they're more likely to take more of those memories with them and integrate.
It's connected when you're willing to have those sharing moments, however you're sharing it, if it's in a journal or whatever.
So one thing that I'm really interested right now in some of the research that I'm doing is what's the connection between those memories and the continuity of memories and how we integrate them and our ability, people's abilities as storytellers, right? So my sort of hypothesis right now is that if people are better storytellers, and you can teach people to be better storytellers and increase their confidence in storytelling, that they're going to be more likely to take more stuff from experiences with them, right? Because they're able to tell a story about, oh, this is what happened. This is sort of how I connect to what happened, what this means to me, and articulate that to other people. Those people are more likely to be transformed by their experiences, as opposed to just sort of bouncing along life and doing stuff, but not really ever taking the time to fully sort of integrate that into their identities and worldview, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, that's interesting. So this month of June, Connections Experiment is, we've compiled all these ideas of this, a modernized family reunion. Mm-hmm. And the essence is that, if you're in a COVID situation, if your family is all over the world and not able to connect on a face-to-face basis, that there's also this idea of being able to apply a virtual aspect of it, whether that's on social media or Zoom or some kind of hybrid situation. Sure. So how could you see, and you mentioned like that idea of anticipation, participation, and reflection. Mm-hmm. And so if we're talking about this concept of a modernized family reunion, like how do you see like some of the people who are on here and interested in family history and family reunions, how could you apply experience design to having like an amazing modernized family reunion experience?
Yeah, so this sort of goes back to another core aspect of experience design is it's about intentionality, right? And so you've got to articulate where you want to get to and then build an experience journey to help people get to that. I think
that's an interesting thing too, because how do you push your intent? Like maybe that's a good starting place, is because if you're like, I have an idea, and my idea is that I just want everybody to get together and have fun and enjoy each other's company. And that's a solid goal. I'm not, no knock to that goal. But what is it that, like, how do you push how do you establish your intent and then really push that intent to be into something magical?
Right? Yeah. So that's a great question. This is how I think about it. And usually where I start any project, whether it's working with students or consulting with a business or talking about family reunions, is just to say, like, what do we want people to say when this experience is over? And I think by trying to have, as opposed to just like, we want people to have a good time, right? Okay, I need more detail. Like, so let's get down and like, what are specific things you would want people to say at the end of this experience or the end of this family reunion, right? And if you can come up with a couple of key statements, right? Sort of these, again, it's like a little story snippet, right? Like, what is that story you want people to say, right? Yeah. And then that becomes your target, right? So Walt Disney said that everything speaks when he was thinking of, designing Disneyland, right? So everything speaks, like the pavement and the garbage cans and the signage and the characters and the rides, like everything speaks, and you want everything to speak in harmony with each other, right? So
you want to say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to say, like, okay, so if we know what we want people to say, like we when we have that statement, then we can start saying, okay, like what is in harmony with that? Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore have written a book called The Experience Economy. And in that book, they talk about harmonizing cues, right? So what are sort of cues throughout the experience that harmonize or don't, right? And so once I have identified this is the statement, then I'm thinking about, okay, so what are the mini experiences or touch points across anticipation, participation, and reflection? And for each of those touch points, so let's say it's like the first email that goes out to the family, right? If we're thinking about anticipation phase, it says, save the date and here's what's coming. And then there's another email with like the itinerary, and maybe there's some stuff that people have to do beforehand. Like, hey, we want everybody to like, write a 300-word summary of 2020 and sort of highs and lows and post that or wherever. So all of those things, each of those, I would want to be able to articulate, like, how does this connect to or contribute to this thing that I want people to say at the end, right?
That end game, yeah. Being able
that end game. And so it's just being super intentional about each of those pieces, even if it's just a logistics email, like, okay, what can we do with this that even when people get this email that I'm thinking about what are people going to say when they get this? What do I want people to say when they get this email? What do I want people to say when we ask them to do this preparatory thing? What do we want them to say? And then we move into participation phase. And it's regardless of the channel, right? Because I think we're all more familiar with virtual stuff.
All the online stuff.
Yeah. So that's just a channel. There may be some channel fatigue to a certain degree with some of those things. But just as we move through all of those touch points, if we can just link that, sometimes I think about it as like a clothesline. Like my clothesline is that story why I want people to tell at the end. And I'm going to link each touch point on that clothesline intentionally, right? And so that everything is speaking towards that end game. And you bring up this point, like, okay, we're trying to do this online, virtually, because of a variety of issues. What's interesting about going back to this idea of an Experiencescape, you change any element of the Experiencescape and it changes the whole experience, right? So yeah, it's like you go from online to in person, right? It's different. Or if you usually
there's a lot of considerations, right? Like,
yeah, there's all of these.
Oh, I'm used to this set, and that makes sense to me.
But anyway, for me, it's just like, I think there's a lot more nitty gritty, but it really like starts with like, what's the story we want people to tell at the end, and try to be explicit, like turn that into specific statements you want people to say. And then just think about those touch points across each phase and try to connect each of those touch points to what you're trying to say. Because it's that sort of interaction is what we want people to say and what's the experience that we're providing, telling them, right? And you want that because
I think in my mind, like, as a person who's done some events in the past and family reunions, been in charge of some family reunions, I have this moment where there are certain things that I get excited about, right? Like, I like the planning, I like the details, I kind of like the front end of it, and I get so wrapped up in that sometimes that maybe I don't see that end. So I think that is a genius way to look at it, to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. This is why we're doing these games. This is why we're doing these, these certain get together moments. This is why we're doing these, like, having that, like, what's the story at the end? What are you trying to get at the end makes so much more sense than just being like, okay, we're going to do a craft. We're going to have a cheese snack. We're definitely doing fondue, like all of those kinds of like moments that you want to build, but having that end game in mind makes so much sense to me.
Yeah. It just is that filter to allow you to make decisions, right?
Totally.
You can do anything, but you can't do everything. Right. And so it allows you to sort of make that decision, like, okay, like filter through stuff. Like, what is it that we actually want to do? There's something else that you said that I thought was great that I want to respond to, but it's gone now. But
well, if you find it again, we can go back. That is fine. So in your mind, like, what is the difference between having kind of just an ordinary experience and a really extraordinary experience? Because Disney, I would say, was the extraordinary, right? Like, all of the moving parts and pieces are definitely there. And I think sometimes we go in thinking, okay, we're gonna do something pretty neat. It's gonna be fine, but and you almost have a tendency to minimize, I think, sometimes, especially when you're building something big with a lot of family members who you care about and you want them to have a good time and all those things. And I think there's a tendency sometimes to be like, you know what, we're going to do some things that are fine, like that people will enjoy, but we don't want to go too big or be disappointed. But how do you go from having like an ordinary experience to having this like extraordinary experience?
Yeah, well, I think to answer that question, like you do both, right? And what I mean by that is, I mentioned this earlier, but attention is a limited resource, right? So over the course of an experience, like eventually you're going to spend all of your attention. Or I've heard people talk about it in terms of fun tickets, right? So like once you spend all your fun tickets, like I can't have any more fun. Like I've spent all my fun tickets, like I'm just
out.
done,
We are maxed out.
Right.
Sure.
And so you might spend fun tickets on like just getting to the venue, or if it's an online thing, like figuring out like how to make your microphone work, or so thinking about attention over time, we want to be intentional about where we ask people to spend their attention. So if you think let's say you've got 20 different touch points of a family reunion, right? Both across anticipation, participation, reflection. I'm just making up a number, but a lot of those touch points you want to be ordinary, still connected to your theme, but ordinary in terms of they're just simple, right? And they are low cost in terms of attention, right? So if there's things that you don't want people to like burn a bunch of their attention or a bunch of their fun tickets on things you don't want them burning fun tickets on, right? Like
you got to save those for the really good stuff.
Yeah. Save those. And then you want to think like, okay, where are our signature moments? And make sure that
I like that idea. Signature moment.
Got to the signature moment, they've got the attentional resource to spend on it, right? Like they're ready. They're not just like, oh, I'm so exhausted by this point, right?
Or they're frustrated by whatever the lead in is, right? Like by maybe the microphone,
like,
maybe they didn't know where they were going.
Right. Yeah. So all of those stuff, you don't want people to spend their attention on stuff that you don't want them to spend their attention on, right? Because you've got these signature moments. And then the other thing to think about is like, when do you do those signature moments? And there's some interesting research by a guy named Daniel Kahneman and a bunch of other people about when to do them, right? Because in Kahneman's research, it's pretty clear that we experience things. We have sort of what he calls an experienced self and a remembering self. So in the experienced self, like moment by moment, you're like, I like this. I don't like this. This was okay. I like this. I don't like this. But our remembering self, when we think back, like a week later, after we get home from a vacation or a family reunion, we're not thinking about all of those moments. We're remembering, depending on the person, depending on the length of the activity, but the primary points that we tend to remember are beginnings and ends and peaks and pits.
So kind of a cadence. Would you describe it like that? Like kind of creating a cadence for how you know what I mean?
Yes.
So
it's sort of like a cadence. It's also thinking about our brains are hardwired for novelty, right? So beginnings and ends are novel because there's these transitions, right? And then we're going to remember sort of these often emotional highs and lows, right? That's what we'll remember over time. And so this is why the signature moments is so important. So if you're going to have a couple of signature moments, you want to make sure that you are really intentional about the beginning and endings, and that you build in, you try to fill in pits and build in some peaks. And I think the jury's out in terms of like, when should those peaks be? Should they be at the beginning or at the end? I don't think that matters as much. There should be some peaks, and the beginnings and endings should be intentional.
Well, maybe that flow too kind of depends on your family. If you have a bunch of introverts, if you have a bunch of extroverts, like I think that what you're saying, like what your pits and what your highs are going to, I mean, those are going to vary depending on kind of almost the personality of your family, the culture of your family.
Totally.
So you got to consider kind of what those things are too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. And regardless of the family, I think also you don't need to have like an extraordinary moment after moment after moment after moment, right? People just don't have enough attention to spend on
capacity for that. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't need to be thrilled at every moment, right? But we want a couple of peaks. We want certain things to be easy. And to your point about understanding individuals and the sort of general culture in the family, people want to feel like the experience is a fit for them, right? Or there's some sense that like who they are has been taken into consideration of experience.
Well, and sometimes that, I know we've talked a little bit kind of in the process of making this, the family reunion plan for this month is just the idea of giving other people, because a lot of this sounds to me like, oh, these are all, I am in charge of doing all of those things. Like the things that you're talking about feel like it starts to feel heavy because you're saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And the hope is, and correct me if I'm wrong, like if you have a different perspective, like, but in my mind, I'm like, you need to tap your, you need to tap your audience. You should know your people well enough to be like, okay, who can help me? Who's going to be the best person to help me make that moment sing, make that moment connective, make it so that it's a memory making moment. Who is that person in my family who can help me? And it shouldn't just be, so how do you expand it past being feeling like I am one person who has to be in charge of this whole reunion to being like, I need some help with
Oh
this. Who
yeah,
are my go-tos? And
totally. And to sort of add to that point, I think the best experiences are ones where we feel as participants, we feel more like actors than audience members, right? So that
sure,
I'm playing a role in what's
you got
happening,
skin in
as
it.
opposed to
You got
just be
skin in the
like,
game for sure.
do this, and now we're going to do this, right? There's other research that suggests that just like we have physical needs for food, shelter, and water, that we also have psychological needs, and those are autonomy. We want to feel like we have a choice in what's happening. Competence, we can do the things that we're being asked to do, and then relatedness, we feel connected to the people around us. And like any experience that hits those three marks, like autonomy, related, and competence, like people, we're just hardwired to enjoy those types of experiences. And so going back to your point, if we can think about experiences as sort of this co-creative partnership, like where can you build in opportunities for people to have choice and be involved and be an actor in what's happening, right? So we don't have to like spell out and dictate everything. Like, yeah. As to your point, like when you feel like you have skin in the game, or you're given choice, or you're given a role, it's much easier to pay attention to something, right?
Yeah.
And so
So
I
at the
think,
beginning, is it like you push hard what the intent is for kind of your team? Let's say you have a family reunion, you have like 6 people, you've decided these are good people that are going to be helping me work on this. Would that be your biggest thing in the beginning, was to be like, okay, I'm in charge of the family reunion this year and my idea is this? Or do you come into the group and say, okay, what are we going to do? How should we do this? What is our intent? Like,
yeah,
do you
that,
push as like kind of the leader person your intent on the front end, or do you ask for, how do you establish your intent? That's what I'm saying
yeah,
for
so
this.
that's a great question. I think making sure that you understand the people that you're trying to design the experience for, I think is the first point, right? So if you've got a group of, say, 6 family members coming together, I think it's a conversation that not only involves those 6 people, but also asking those 6 people to like look outside of that group and say, like, what does our family really want from a family reunion? Like, why are we doing this? Like, what did different people want? And of course, you can't do all things for everybody, but just the mere act of like asking, again, this is the speaking to choice, that like, oh, your voice matters. And what that group can do is sort of synthesize what the grander family is saying, and then trying to articulate not what we're going to do first, but what is the primary need we're trying to meet, right? And so once you identify that need, that then allows you to say, okay, like here, this is the primary need that we're trying to meet. Like this is, in essence, you can think about like what's the job you're hiring a family reunion to do for your family,
Oh yeah.
right? And so if you can identify like what that job is, and this is Clayton Christensen's framework, then you're more likely to create and design an experience that's going to meet that need. So as a group, you can say like, what is that need? What's our primary need for our family right now? Great. Okay, once we've identified that need, then we can start saying, okay, like what are all of our ideas? Like what are all the things that would help us meet that need? What's that sort of end story we want to be able to tell? Like if we meet this need, like what will people say, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Oh, I
Like
like how that ties together. That
let's
totally
like
makes sense to me.
target that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. I have a couple of like from the audience questions if that's okay with you. I don't want to mess them
Sure.
up. So hang on just a second. Okay, so your book mentions this idea of icing on the cake. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that concept would apply in a family reunion context?
Sure. So I think this is like when we're thinking about experiences, it's fun to think about like the exciting parts are often like well, let me back up. So the analogy of baking a cake, right? Like decorating is the funnest part. I don't know. Maybe some people like to bake, but like I know like my kids are really excited to like decorate the cake, right? But if the cake doesn't taste very good, right? Unless it's just like a decoration cake, that people are just going to look at. Like, why have we done that? Like, if you got to bake a good cake before you decorate it, and with an experience, you've got to do a lot of the things that we're talking about before getting to like, oh, what will the decorations be? Where should the venue be? Like, what are the family t-shirts going to look like? Like all of the things that are sort of fun.
Right.
You've got to do all of the other stuff, right? There's sort of this expectation of any experience where there's these sort of service promises, right? It's like information is going to be clear. People who are providing the experience know what they're doing. It feels safe, right? Like all of these, this is more of an organizational standpoint, but just like all of this has been done. And then if you check all these boxes, right, thinking with their family, like, yeah, logistics are clear. People know where to go, blah, 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 all of these different things. We've done the groundwork.
All the cake things. All that.
Yeah.
All the
cake. Great. Now let's do t-shirts. Let's think about like all of these different, just fun stuff, right? To really like push it to delight people, right? So we want to make sure that we satisfy by, again, going back to our conversation about attention, that people like don't have to pay attention to things they don't want to, because there are certain things that are just seamless and easy. And then we're asking them to pay attention to the most important parts. But we can't just jump to like the big signature moment or whatever without having done all the other work, right? It won't work. It'll fall apart. And there's lots of examples of, when people have just focused on the flourishes and there's nothing, there's no substance behind that, right? Like,
I know that's hard. That is a hard temptation to avoid, if you ask me, because you're like the fun, the shiny, which I know you can mention it because you said you were a shiny follower.
Yeah, totally. And so I think, and that can also hop, depending on the person, there can be, a desire to be like, okay, we gotta pick a location first, or we got to do this first. We got to do that first. And maybe sometimes, right. Maybe this is just as big. Yeah.
Dates is always a thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody has to.
Yeah. Dates is always a thing. But I think going back to like, what's the job that we're hiring a reunion to do? And then have that conversation before you start constraining yourself too much by other decisions.
By the shiny stuff. I like that. Yeah. So what, you said you guys like to do a lot of outdoors things, but from your, in your life, in your experience, even in your work life, what are your favorite activities that you do to connect?
So as a family, we love mountain biking. So our kids are 14, 12, 9, and 6, and everybody rides. And so we'll often go sort of pick a destination that we can go ride, whether that's Moab, or we were in a race in Colorado a couple of weeks ago. But we also just love, I think there's something about there's a variety of things about being outdoors that have all kinds of different benefits. Right. Even if it's just like taking a walk in the park, right? Like daily doses of nature. There's lots of research to show how beneficial that can be. But I think, especially in a world where there's so much sort of distraction and things that pull at our attention, for us to be able to get our family outdoors, whether it's, backpacking or camping or mountain biking or skiing or whatever it might be, just doing something, together in the outdoors is really powerful. And I think that the secret ingredients in my mind to like powerful shared experiences are like a little bit of challenge and a little bit of novelty. And whenever you have something that's novel, that's challenging and you do it with other people, like those relationships are usually stronger at the end of that, right? Like you don't want to do too much challenge or too much novelty, right? Because you don't want people to, just be anxious or overwhelmed. But I think we're always thinking about, like how do we do things that are hard enough, that are different enough, and try to do them together.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. So what are, and I think you kind of spoke to this a little bit just now, but what are some of the psychological benefits that you've experienced or noticed in either conducting your experience or even in your personal life, just the kind of cream that's risen to the top in terms of psychological benefits?
Yeah, I think, I think a lot of people have had that experience where and this is different, right? Our relationships with our relationship with technology is different for every person, but having done a lot of experiences with people in the outdoors, it's pretty interesting to see how quickly people can detach from their technology, even if it's just a day. And for some people that might feel scary at first, if that's something that they haven't done before. But just those little opportunities to like disconnect and sort of relax psychologically. There's some interesting research. The way they explain it is, if you think about sort of your mental awareness or attention as a muscle, and that when you are focused on a screen, all of your attention is sort of hyper focused on a very narrow range of stimuli, right? I'm just like focused here, or even like if I'm working in my office or inside. But when I go outside, even though there's way more stuff going on, it's like I have to like relax that attentional muscle and sort of take it all in, and just that sense of like, oh, okay, like I'm not narrow in focused on this like one thing. Like I'm just sort of there, like my visual and sensory range is so much broader here. And so I think,
what does it get you? What does that get you?
oh, I mean,
hyper focus is kind of fun. You're looking at a lot of different
totally.
stories flipping through. So what does it get you to do that? Like, what is the benefit?
Oh, there are so many benefits. There's a great website. So there's a nonprofit called childrenandnaturenetwork.org, and they have a whole research compendium on there in terms of like the benefits of being outside that range from better eyesight to lower levels of attention deficit syndrome behavior to lower levels of stress and higher levels of a variety of different thriving indicators. The research, I mean, over the last 20 years, the research on the importance of spending time outside connected to like all kinds of biometric indicators, like stress hormones and the way we metabolize food. I mean, it's just like there's so much research to suggest that spending time outside is really, really beneficial. And then I think, for me, it comes back to relationship quality, relationship like with myself and relationship with others. And again, like I said before, when we can have experiences with a little bit of challenge and a little bit of novelty, not every single, sometimes it's nice to just watch a movie. Sometimes it's just nice to like relax and kick back. But I think we need to sprinkle throughout our lives opportunities to do things with other people that are a little bit challenging and a little bit novel, and that cements relationships. I mean, you think about like living in a family, like there's a lot of like novel, challenging, shared experiences, right? But that's sort of what makes our family story and connects us to each other, right? It's like, remember when this happened, or remember when this happened. And a lot of those stories are about like hard, novel things, right?
Yeah. Challenges that you faced together, or challenges that people faced on their own and had to come out of. And yeah, I think always hearing those formative and like life, like when like when you're steered in a certain direction, when your choices are made, I think being able to say, I made this choice and this is what happened, like being able to share those is so, it's so important to being able to feel connected to your people. So that's awesome. Thank you. Okay. So there's a couple more. Okay, so where can people go if they want to learn more about experience design in general? Where would we send people?
Oh, that's a great. I'll give you a couple of reading recommendations. So I've got a book, Designing Experiences, that I wrote with a good friend, Bob Rossman. And the reason we wrote that book was there's a number of other books that I'm going to mention that are great, but what we wanted to sort of contribute to the conversation is a more sort of systematic recipe. Like here's the steps that you can take to design experiences, which we've been talking about. There's another great book that came out a couple of years ago called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And it's a really excellent book that summarizes a lot of the research around experiences. And it's just a great read. They write really good books. There's another book called The Art of Gathering by Paria Parker. And especially, so she's got some great principles in that book. And then I've got a good friend. He's a Brit by the name of James Wallman, and he's written a book called Time and How to Spend It. That's really excellent. Just thinking about, he's written another book about, the importance of having, spending resources on experiences over things. And then this book, they're both great, but this one I really love because it's like, okay, so if you're focused on time and experiences, like how should you spend that time on what types of experiences? And I mean, I could continue to like other ones, but those are three that I think I really enjoy and recommend.
Okay, so just in kind of a wrap up here, what would be, I mean, we've been on here for a few minutes, so what would be the prime takeaway if you were like, somebody just came on here and they had 1.5 minutes to spend with you, what would you want them to take away from this conversation?
So I'd say it goes back to what we talked about pretty early on, is when you're thinking about an experience that you want to provide to other people, articulate what it is you want them to say at the end of the experience. Like, what's that story that you want them to tell? And once you've got that as a target, you're going to have a better chance of stringing together a bunch of touch points, creating a journey that's going to lead people someplace that you're all going to be excited about.
Yeah, and I love that idea of creating a journey that is what we're trying to do. Like when we have those moments of being able to come together, like a common journey, and creating those common moments where we can say, hey, remember when this happened, or you weren't there, but it was awesome and this is what happened. Like being able to push that forward and remember that these things worked. Let's do it again. Like let's do something similar. Let's do the things that we really liked or nix the things that we didn't. And I just think it's such a valuable opportunity to be able to just be more conscious in your effort to, drive your mission home, as opposed to just being like, oh, these are the fun things, which is my tendency. So
or on the other end of just well, let's just see what happens, and we'll just sort of like, sort of go where the wind takes us, right? Which is nice in doses in life, but I think being able to really be intentional and say, okay, let's try to go someplace together that we think will be interesting and enjoyable. That takes some work. And it's how we tell stories too. Like all of our stories are about people going on journeys and getting someplace else. Like every single story is basically that story.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for meeting with us today. It was such a pleasure. There are just so many things. I feel like my mind is like buzzing with so many amazing things that I could start and try. And
thanks for being a great host and all the great questions and letting me chat with you a little bit. Hopefully this will be helpful for some folks planning family reunions.
Yeah, so thanks so much.